Hello and welcome back to day 4 on the Workspace ONE webinar series. Today we're going to look a bit more on the security side of things, and I'm really looking forward to hear about the intrinsic security thing, which is a buzzword going around on all the products. So looking forward to that. Again, if you have questions during the webinar, please use the Q&A, or you can use the chat, but preferably the Q&A section that will allow us to pick up the questions and get those answers. And it's your opportunity to get more information and get more out of this session if you participate and do have questions. Also, raise your hand if you want to ask the question live, and we can unmute you. So let's jump right into it. And Ben is presenting again today, so take it away.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah, so sorry, you've got me again today. As Taj just said, if you got any questions from today, then please ask in the chat, or questions about any of the sessions we've done this week. Put them in the chat, and I'm happy to stay on a little bit afterwards to answer any additional questions anyone's got. So just ask away. And when it comes to buzzwords, yeah, you're right. Intrinsic security is a bit of a buzzword, but I used to call this content zero trust. And I think that's an even bigger buzzword that's out there at the moment. So I think intrinsic security is probably a little bit of a better fit for what we're going to talk about today. So I'm going to run through this slide one more time, and I know you've seen it every day this week, but I think it bears repeating. So again, I'm gonna call out all of the different components we have as part of Workspace ONE, all the different features and all the different licensing. And again, I think this is a really useful slide because it calls out everything that we do. You know what? There's probably some bits that we do as part of Workspace ONE, as part of VMware's digital workspace that we don't have in here. But the idea behind this is to show you the completeness of this digital workspace and why it's different from every other digital workspace out there. It's because it includes everything. It covers every ecosystem. It covers every requirement for those ecosystems, all the different applications that you want to be able to offer to a user base. Everything comes back into here. So with that in mind, let's focus on security today. And when it comes to security, we're actually going to be touching pieces. We're going to be talking a little bit about security in Horizon. We're going to be talking quite a lot about what intelligence and the automation and the analytics piece of intelligence does. We're also going to talk a little bit about Unified Endpoint Manager, because at its base, anything to do with enterprise mobility management is a security tool. If we lived in an ideal world where there were no security concerns whatsoever, you probably wouldn't need to have anything like an enterprise mobility management tool. But because we need to be able to secure applications and secure identities and secure access to devices, that's why we have these tools. And then we've got access. And again, access at its core is very much a security proposition. It's about identity. It's about making sure that we check a user's identity so we can trust them and then allow them access to different resources. And then we've got Workspace ONE security. And we'll be covering that. That's all about our Carbon Black acquisition. I'll be covering that, not in a massive amount of detail today, but I will be covering that. And one thing to call out about all of this is make sure you tune into VMworld next week, because we'll be making a lot of announcements around security, around intrinsic security, around zero trust. So potentially I'll be updating all of this content the week after VMworld. So we'll have all of the updated content in there and all the different announcements that we have. But let's focus on what intrinsic security looks like right now in the platform. So first of all, we've got a big challenge when it comes to technology. And again, I'll go back to the fact that 20 years ago, end user computing was actually quite simple. It was a box that sat under a desk that ran Windows. That was it. Or sometimes it was a laptop that ran Windows. But basically, you had a very static way of working. And those Windows desktops, those Windows laptops would have plugged in to a LAN, either through a VPN or through Wi-Fi or physically using an Ethernet cable, and they would have been connected into a domain. That's pretty much what it would have looked like. And it was like that pretty much everywhere. Your security principle was based on location. It was based on trusting the location. It was based on trusting the network you're connected to. It's based on trusting the device and the user based on that domain connectivity. The problem we have these days, I say it's a problem, it's also an opportunity, is that all of that has dissolved, especially over the past 6 months, because you can no longer guarantee that those users are going to be in an office. And if they're not in an office, what are they connected to? They're obviously not connected to corporate Wi-Fi or corporate Ethernet. And if they're Windows 10, then it's possible that they're not connected to the LAN either. So even if they are remote, even if they are connected to a different network, even if they're connected, even if they're on that other network, they're probably using a VPN to get connectivity back into the data center so that they can talk to the domain. And so the domain can tell you whether or not that user is who they say they are, and potentially there's a computer account on there too. All that's gone. What we have these days is a dissolved perimeter. You can't count on those old ways of enforcing security, because potentially you can have users on devices that aren't corporate owned. You can have users who don't have a traditional Active Directory, on-prem Active Directory account. Maybe they've got Office 365, maybe they've got an Azure AD account. They'll be connected into networks that you don't own. And potentially there's no requirement for a VPN there. And maybe they'll be using applications from multiple different stores. So those traditional security requirements have gone away. And it used to be that security was all about securing that perimeter. It was all about putting firewalls around the perimeter of your data center and your networks. If your users are now outside of that perimeter, those firewalls aren't going to do you a great deal of good. So what we're going to go through today is how we enforce security across your end user estate, your applications, your users themselves, the devices, but also make it incredibly transparent so that these users don't actually know that there's a security perimeter in place. Because security has got an awful habit of getting in the way of being productive. So we'll go through what that looks like. And I've already mentioned zero trust, even though it is a massive buzzword. What I'm going to call out now are the security principles that we embrace as part of Workspace ONE. And these are zero trust principles. So first of all, we've got users. We're going to talk a little bit about how we authenticate users. So again, this comes back to trust. Do we trust those users are who they say they are? Okay, so we authenticate and then we authorize. Do those users have access to the applications they should have access to? And then we've got devices and endpoints. And endpoints is all about compliance. Is that device compliant? Does it stay compliant? Does it lose its compliance status? And in that case, how do we make that device then comply? And it sort of gets more granular than that as well, because depending on the compliance of the device, which applications do we allow that device to get access to? And which applications do we allow that user to get access to when they're on that specific device, when they're at a specific compliance level? This sounds quite complicated, but actually it's really easy, and we'll cover it. And then what I think is a real USP, unique selling point for VMware in general, but end user computing, VMware's end user computing specifically, and that's our network security capabilities. And we've got a lot of network security capabilities, not just in the VMware, traditional VMware software-defined data center stack, but also when it comes to EUC. And we bring those together and we make it really, really easy. And we offer some security capabilities which no one else can match. And then we wrap all of this into a cutting-edge analytics platform so that we know exactly what's going on across users and endpoints and applications and networks. We know when something is about to happen. I mean, when we covered employee experience on Monday, we talked about being proactive and understanding when something's going to go wrong. What we can do with analytics is be proactive on a security frontier as well. So we know when something unusual is going to happen or when something unusual is happening in the organization, and we'll cover that. So have a look at the first principle in all of this, users, and probably the most important principle. Without users, you don't really have an end user computing estate. So when it comes to users, realistically, we're talking about different forms of authentication. So potentially there's passwordless, there's multi-factor authentication, conditional access, dynamic risk scoring, which is a really easy one. Traditional security tools have all been about SIEM or SIEM, which is all about, we'll cover this shortly anyway, but it's all about grabbing information from multiple devices and then taking that information and then loading it into a data warehouse and then running analytics against that information, then running intrusion protection analytics against it, and then putting it into a dashboard and then taking action. So we're going to go into a much more dynamic way of doing that, which is user and entity behavior analytics, and we'll cover that, but that's a theme throughout all the security stuff that we do in end user computing at VMware. So when it comes to authentication and different ways of authenticating, this is one of the topics that we covered on Monday. So access, Workspace ONE access is what controls authentication in Workspace ONE. So all your users, whenever they're getting access to applications, or services from the organization, they'll go through Access or the Intelligent Hub. And the Intelligent Hub is the piece of the solution of the platform that provides access to all of the different apps. But you have to authenticate to get access, and there's multiple ways of authenticating. If it's a corporate device like this one, then potentially you can have certificates on that device distributed by Workspace ONE. And that means we can say, okay, well, when a user is accessing an application from their device, and it's an own device with a certificate, and they're in the office, we're just going to allow them straight in. And we'll cover what that sort of authentication compliance looks like shortly. But it means from this one point, from this one authentication, from this one initial user access, a user can get access to all of their applications, native mobile apps, SaaS applications, on-prem, virtual applications and desktops from Horizon. So it becomes a very, very easy thing to get access to all these different applications. And again, it's transparent. The end user doesn't actually know what's going on behind the scenes here. All they see is their Intelligent Hub and their applications. And then we make it very, very easy for them just to grab access using a thumbprint or using Face ID, or on a Windows device using Windows Hello for Business, just to get access to those different applications and integrate with Intelligent Hub. And then we've built in our own multi-factor authentication tools straight into the Intelligent Hub. And again, this is partly what we covered on Monday. But again, it makes it easy to get access. And you can be sure that when you're getting access to those applications, that the platform has authenticated who you are. And that's what it all comes back to. And we'll cover what this looks like again, a bit more holistically when we cover some of the other capabilities we have in the platform. So next we'll talk a little bit about endpoints. So you might remember I said on Monday, maybe you do, maybe you don't, that everything, the whole idea behind everything we do in IT really comes back to one thing, and that's getting information into the hands of people. That's it. We put information into the hands of people. That is what information technology is all about. Now there's networking and storage, there's security and there's performance and there's backups and there's cloud and there's hardware, everything that goes into that. But all of that is there to make it easy for IT to put information into the hands of people. So to do that, there's sort of a hierarchy of requirements. First, you've got the information itself. And information is a formatted version of data. But you need an application to be able to format that and present it to the end user. You need a device for that application to sit on, and then you need networking, you need everything else. So devices are incredibly important. They're one of the core principles when it comes to anything to do with end user computing and also security. So when we're talking about endpoints, from a security perspective, we mean that we're checking and making sure that endpoints comply with our policies. So this could be through device management. So this could be the modern management piece that Hella covered on Tuesday, around managing multiple different types of devices. This could be device compliance. And compliance is about having a baseline set of security criteria that an endpoint device needs to comply with. And then we've got device remediation, which really ties into device compliance. And again, when it comes to Workspace ONE, every ecosystem we have in the platform is a first-class citizen, which means we don't have any favorites. We don't sort of say, okay, if it's a Windows device, we're going to give you all these capabilities. If it's iOS, we're going to give you these. We have the same capabilities across all the different platforms. We have full access to APIs. We have we also have additional capabilities that we can build on top of that because we have advanced PC lifecycle capabilities. And then on top of that, we have Carbon Black, which is a really good USP. And we'll cover Carbon Black shortly, but that's all about having next generation antivirus and threat analytics as part of Workspace ONE. Now, as I called out earlier, Unified Endpoint Manager in its own right is a security proposition. And that's because using MDM controls, using those mobile and APIs, we can lock down and secure lots of different parts of the operating system. And again, we do this across every ecosystem, Windows, Mac, iOS, Android, Chrome, but we can control APIs that means that we can restrict certain parts of the device, potentially restrict the camera, and we'll cover that when we get into DLP a little bit later on. But everything we do in Unified Endpoint Management has a security as its base. So when it comes to conditional access and compliance for an endpoint device, you could say, okay, well, we have a device into a particular office, then we can say, great, we manage that device. Maybe we've deployed a certificate to it. We trust the device. We trust the network. The user has authenticated using Face ID. So they're allowed access to all of the different applications that we offer out. Now, what if it's a managed device, but outside of the network scope? What if it's on a 4G connection, or if it's connecting from a home Wi-Fi network? Well, in that case, we still trust the device. What we don't trust the network. So what we're going to do is we're going to ask the user to input an additional level of authentication. In this case, it will simply pop up with VMware Verify. And it will say, okay, we need you to enter some additional information. We need you to enter an additional factor of information so we can double check you are who you say you are. And you can actually do this on a per application basis. We'll cover this very shortly. But what you could also say is, well, if that device is jailbroken, we no longer trust the device and it's outside of network scope, well, we're not going to let you get access to any of the applications. We're going to block your access altogether to all of the corporate applications that we have. So we have a capability, and this is actually an access capability, where you can simply go into Workspace ONE Access, and you can set different policies for different applications. You can simply type in the application that you want to put an additional policy around, and you can say, well, you're only allowed access to this application if you're on a certain device type. Maybe it's iOS. If you're in a certain location, and if you authenticate in a certain way. If you don't authenticate in that certain way, we'll give you a backup authentication option. If you then authenticate and hit all of these different criteria, then we're going to give you access to this application. But if you fail, you don't have access to it. And the idea behind this is that you can put different levels of security compliance controls around different applications that you have in the organization. Most organizations will have very sensitive applications, maybe line of business applications or customer data, and then they'll have applications that maybe they're okay with the users to use in a more relaxed environment. So potentially productivity tools like Office. So we have all of those capabilities, and they're very, very granular and built into the platform. And again, it's not just mobile devices. We also integrate fully with Windows 10. So when it comes to Windows 10 health attestation, you could potentially have a desktop, a Windows 10 laptop, let's say, and let's say it's one you bought from I don't know, just a shop, which isn't managed. Then when a user tries to get to the Intelligent Hub or tries to get access to any of the corporate information, it will just come back and say, no, access denied, you cannot have access to that data. But if it's a managed device, if it has been enrolled into the organization and it is managed by Workspace ONE, then when the user tries to get access, they'll be granted access. Now, if for some reason that Windows 10 laptop drops out of compliance, then what we can do is send out a compliance profile or a compliance update to that endpoint device. So we can then bring that Windows 10 laptop back up to compliance. And once it's back up to compliance, we allow the user and we allow the device to get access to all the applications they should have access to. So this is a dynamic process. I mean, we understand that devices, even if they're compliant once, potentially aren't going to stay compliant. So we make sure that devices keep a consistent baseline. And on that topic, we actually have a really cool USP as part of Workspace ONE, and this is Workspace ONE baselines. So if you're familiar with managing Windows devices in the old world of the domain, in the old world of group policy, then setting a security baseline is quite a tricky thing to do, because most of the time you're going to be editing the default domain policy and the default domain security policy and putting your security policies in there, and then making sure they override all of the different group policies that you have in the domain. Keeping up to date with that can be quite tricky, because Microsoft will release different updated security baselines, and you have to update your security baseline while trying to make sure it's not breaking anything. But even more difficult is making sure that your devices across the estate that security baseline, and that is a real pain because it's group policy. It's a difficult thing to maintain. It's a difficult thing to get really good visibility on. So that's why we have Workspace ONE baseline. So I'm going to show you a quick video here, and this is creating a security baseline. So in this case, to create a baseline, you simply go into Workspace ONE, that unified console. You click on new baseline, you give it a name, and you can even select what type of baseline you want this to be, whether or not this is from Windows, this is the updated Windows feed or CIS benchmarks, or create a custom baseline for these devices. You can then go in, you can make any changes to this that you want to based on your own or the corporate security baselines. You can go in there, you can change it, and then you can assign this baseline to different subsets of devices. And that is a very useful capability because, as I said earlier, usually default domain security policy hits every Windows device the same. So you can go in here, you can make the changes, assign it to a different subset of devices. But probably one of the more important pieces of this is that once you've assigned this, once you've pushed it out to different groups of devices, you can actually go in and check, and then check on the compliance status. Let me just pause that. So you can see here, I've gone into the list of devices. Then you can see the security baseline, and you can see what the baseline is called. You can see what it is, you can see the version, and you can see that this device is compliant with that Microsoft security baseline. So this is one of those advanced PCLM functionality capabilities that we've got built into Workspace ONE Advanced. And again, if the device doesn't hit that security baseline, then we can stop them from getting access to certain applications. So in this case, the baseline is saying you don't have registry access. So that's a powerful tool that we've got built in. And all this comes back to doing two things. One, making sure that you know that your devices are secure, but two, also making it easy for IT and the security operation within the organization to know and to have confidence that these devices are secure at all times. So while we're on the subject of devices, let's have a little bit of a look at the Carbon Black integration. So for those of you who don't know, Carbon Black were, still are, quite a hot security startup, security technology startup. And they're all about new ways of doing security. Again, the old way of doing security is SIEM, and it's signature-based threat detection. And we'll cover what that is. But we acquired Carbon Black in October of last year, and we had really good integrations with Carbon Black because of Trust Network, and we'll cover Trust Network shortly. But Trust Network is a core piece of the intelligence solution, the intelligence platform we have built into Workspace ONE. And so by acquiring Carbon Black, and again, you'll see a lot of this next week, we have been able to build additional integrations with that technology stack. But having Carbon Black and having the intelligence piece built into Workspace ONE means that we have a whole range of different capabilities. Device compliance, we've got identity and access, risk analytics, and risk analytics is an absolutely core piece of everything to do with security these days. Transport security, so we'll go through per app VPN shortly. The trust networks, these are integrations with the likes of Carbon Black and Netscope and Lookout. And then the next generation antivirus and enterprise detection and response. And we'll cover what those different pieces are. So when it comes to Carbon Black, we've got three key areas where that fits. So the first one is harden, and that's to understand the status and the security posture of all the devices that you have in the organization. And it keeps that up to date in real time as well. So it's not sort of a snapshot and then taking another snapshot. It understands in real time all the different artifacts and all the different security propositions and postures of all of the endpoint devices. And then we've got prevent, and this is all about stopping malicious software from being able to get a foothold on those endpoint devices. So, and again, this is probably one of the problems when it comes to traditional antivirus tools. They're all based on known signatures. So there will be an antivirus vendor who will have a team working out all of the latest threats and all of the latest signatures, and then they get built into the software itself, so that the software can understand the signature and then shut down an attack. When it comes to modern security, it's all about understanding unusual behavior, understanding unusual processes. So if you know what usual is, and this comes into prevent, if you know what usual is across those endpoints, you can then really quickly understand what unusual is. And this then ties into the next piece, next generation antivirus, shutting down any processes that shouldn't be running on those endpoint devices, and even tracing back malicious activities back to a compromised process and then shutting that down, and also displaying to IT very, very quickly, this is a process we've detected on these machines, we've shut that process down, this is the problem, this is something you need to look into. So taking Workspace ONE, Workspace ONE Intelligence together with Carbon Black, we have got a security proposition which is industry leading. And this is just the end user computing piece. We have security capabilities right across the VMware stack that no one else comes close to catching up with. So with the, you might remember that at the start when I showed the big slide with all the different capabilities in, we talked about the Carbon Black, the Workspace ONE security add-on. So Workspace ONE security add-on for Workspace ONE is this, it's Endpoint Advanced. So that is an add-on to the Workspace ONE Advanced SKU. So if you have Workspace ONE Advanced, you can then get Workspace ONE Security, which is the Carbon Black bolt-on. do we have any questions so far?
We have runs around the MFA solution, if other MFAs can be used.
Yes, absolutely. So in fact, that's a really good question. I probably should have covered that. So yeah, we support identity training. So if you're using another MFA like Microsoft MFA or Okta or Ping or OneLogin or anything like that, we will actually integrate with that. So you can either use the inbuilt identity management of Workspace ONE Access, or you can use Access as the presentation layer and instead use that third party to offer your MFA integration. So we will be quite flexible when it comes to what your authentication process looks like. And in fact, we have a really good partnership with Okta. And we have a lot of joint customers with Okta, because if they need some of the additional capabilities that Okta brings, fine, that's cool. We'll integrate Access with that solution. And in fact, I have a lot of customers also use Microsoft MFA to do the authentication, both on the Workspace ONE and the Access piece, and also on Horizon. So moving on to the next piece, apps. Great, fantastic. So we can secure the users, we can secure the devices, but what about the applications? Applications are really important. Well, this is where we have inbuilt tools, and a lot of these tools actually come back to the traditional MAM, or mobile application management tools we've got in Unified Endpoint Manager. So these are traditional EMM type capabilities. So we'll cover data loss prevention, and then we'll talk a little bit more about conditional access, just to reiterate what we've already covered. So DLP, so you can either call it data loss prevention or data leakage prevention. The idea behind this is that, let's say you have a user has a personal device or BYO device, and they've got their own applications on there. What the organization might want to do is allow the user to consume enterprise applications on there. So great, you've got this unmanaged device. You've now got a corporate application, in this case Boxer, on that device. What you want to do is to make sure that no enterprise information leaves that application. Now, if it's an email app like this, like Boxer, then potentially you can have a lot of sensitive information there, especially attachments that you do not want to lose control of. And that's where DLP comes in. Because what you can do, when you deploy that application, you can put a DLP wrapper around it, and you can say, okay, we're deploying this application to an unmanaged, untrusted device. We want to retain control of how that application accesses and controls data. So you put this under it. And in that DLP config, you could say, okay, when that application is running, we're going to allow it access to the camera. Because maybe one of the tasks that our end users need to carry out is to be able to email photographs. So maybe they're taking, I don't know, photographs of train tracks. Maybe that's part of their job. They need to be able to email those pictures back to headquarters. Fine, we can allow them access to the camera. What we're not going to allow them to do, though, is to copy and paste data or emails or text or images from the email application and then paste them into another application that we don't control. So same with the screenshot. We're not going to let them take a screenshot while that application is running. And when it comes to attachments, we are absolutely not going to allow them to remove or open attachments in any application which isn't enterprise managed. So you cannot take those attachments and open them outside of that application unless the other application also has a DLP config around it provided by the organization. So in this case, if it's Workspace ONE content and it's an attachment, the user can open that attachment, but only in Workspace ONE content. So that's how you retain control of information. Now, there are two key ways of doing DLP. Well, potentially there's three. There's three key ways. So the traditional way of doing DLP was through app wrapping. So you take the application back into IT, you then put a secure SDK wrapper around that application, and it's that SDK wrapper that would control all of the IO for that app itself. So you'd have sort of an application within an application, and then you'd control this wrapper. The newer way of doing it was through app config, which is something that was set up by AirWatch. And obviously AirWatch is now a core piece of Workspace ONE. So with app config, you can simply take supported applications from the public app store and then inject config into them. So you can inject all the DLP stuff into those applications. And we also have the ability to integrate with Microsoft app protection policies. So if it's a Microsoft application, like a productivity application like Microsoft Office on a mobile device, we can actually integrate with those app protection policies to also put DLP around them. And that's one of the key ways that we integrate with the likes of Intune. We'll use the Intune Graph API, we'll use app protection policies to be able to protect Microsoft applications on any device, whether or not it's managed or not. And that sort of leads me into the next piece. We have DLP controls around every platform out there. And we can integrate with all of these specific DLP APIs that are made available by the different ecosystems and the different ecosystem vendors. So if it's iOS, we can do the SDK app wrapping. If it's Windows 10, we can do Windows information protection. Mac OS, we can do the restrictions profile. So we have the ability to put DLP around applications on every platform. And again, when it comes to accessing those applications, this all comes back to access and the ability to be really granular around all of the different security principles when it comes to getting access. One of the other key capabilities we've got, and this is another one of those base enterprise mobility management capabilities in the platform, but we have the ability to do two different types of wipe on a device. So let's say it's a BYO device again. Then what you can do is an enterprise wipe of that device. So let's say you've got a user who's downloaded the Intelligent Hub and they've got access to a subset of applications for the organization, but then they hand in the notice and they leave. What you can do is you can do an enterprise wipe and you can remove all of the enterprise data and applications from that device. You don't touch the personal applications, so all of their personal photographs, all of their configurations, all of their personal applications stay on that device, you don't touch it. But then all of the enterprise applications and enterprise access is removed from that device. The next capability we have is for a device wipe. So if it's a corporate device that you've given to that end user, and that end user leaves but doesn't return their device, then you can simply do a complete factory reset of that device back to factory defaults. And because these devices will hopefully have been bought through the likes of DEP or Android Zero Touch or Microsoft out-of-box enrollment or anything like that, that means that when the device is, when there's a device reset on the endpoint device, when they turn it back on, it will ask them to sign into Workspace ONE. And if they've left the organization, they'll no longer have working credentials to be able to sign in, so the device becomes useless to them. They just have to send it back. So these are the capabilities we have around users and devices and applications themselves. So the next piece I want to cover is networks. And as I said a little bit earlier on, networking and networking security is one of the key unique selling points we have in the platform. Before I do that, there is another question. That's just Heather responding. Thank you, Heather. So next section, securing networks. So some of you may be aware of VMware NSX, and we've had NSX for about 5 years now. And NSX is the ability to do complex networking, but in the virtualization layer. And it provides a whole load of different capabilities through being able to do layer 3 routing and traffic management all in the hypervisor without having to do it in expensive network hardware. Potentially the key piece of this, though, well, certainly I think so, the key piece of NSX is the ability to be able to wrap a firewall, a transparent firewall, layer 4 firewall around every single virtual machine that you have running in the organization. So potentially, if we go back to VDI, and I did promise we'd talk about Horizon security as well, if we go back to VDI, you could quite easily wrap a firewall around all the VDI pools that you have in an organization. One of the things that we covered, that Hella covered yesterday, virtual apps and desktops, was the jump platform. There's 3 key stages. User logs in, we then create a brand new Windows 10 desktop for them, we then attach their applications, and then we put their personalization on. With NSX, we actually have a step 0 or a step 1.5, wherever you want to put it. So that when the desktop is created, we will wrap a firewall around that virtual machine. Even though we've just created it, we'll wrap a firewall around it, and that firewall will have rules based on who the user is. So that user now has a personalized firewall that wraps around them, wraps around their virtual machine. And we talked about perimeter security right at the start of the session. So perimeter security is no longer that important. But if you think about what well, it is important, but in this context, it's probably not as important as it used to be. So if we think about a virtual desktop, how a virtual desktop works, what you're actually doing is inviting users on their endpoint devices directly through your perimeter firewall and then directly into your VDI network. That's what you're doing. You're giving them full access into the data center. What we can do with NSX is we can say, okay, fine, you can do that. You can come in through the perimeter firewall. But then what we're going to do is we're going to wrap a firewall around that virtual machine that you're accessing that limits you to access the services that you should get access to and nothing more. So if a malicious user does get access, they can't break out of that firewall and then go and compromise other services in the organization or in the data center. And we call this protecting east to west traffic. The perimeter firewall protects north to south, and NSX protects east to west traffic. So you have a finance desktop, and a finance user launches the finance virtual machine. They then have a finance firewall. The same when it comes to HR. They'll access a HR VDI desktop, and we just spin that up instantly using Jump platform, but also put the HR firewall around it. And the same when it comes to IT. So you have these users connecting in, coming through the perimeter firewall, but now they have the organization has the protection so that these users cannot break out of their secure bubbles in the organization. So that's USP, unique selling point number one. The next piece we have is around VMware Tunnel. And we've sort of mentioned per app VPN previously, but let's have a look at why per app VPN is so important. So if you think about traditional VPN, and most organizations that I talk to, and especially during the pandemic, have been using traditional VPN. So either that's direct access or always on VPN or Cisco AnyConnect or anything like that. They'll have Windows 10 laptops with a VPN client on there. And then when a user wants to get access, either the VPN client will start up automatically or the user will have to launch that client. They'll have the likes of split DNS on there as well to try and hide the traffic off in multiple directions. But the big problem you have with a device level tunnel, device level VPN, is that let's say you've got multiple applications on that endpoint device. You've got 3 applications, but potentially there's some malware on there too. So maybe they're not using Carbon Black on that endpoint device, and maybe there's some malware. With a device level VPN tunnel, what's going to happen is all the different traffic on that endpoint will now have access into the sensitive parts of the data center. So that malicious network has bypassed, because the VPN tunnel has now bypassed that perimeter security and is now already in the internal services. So that is a big problem with any sort of device level VPN network. And I would sort of say that some of the requirements to have that connection back into the data center have started to disappear a little bit, especially if you're using modern management. If you're using Workspace ONE to manage those endpoints, then you don't need to connect into the network to do anything to do with the domain or management. But potentially there's still going to be line of business applications that you need to connect to. So this is where Workspace ONE per app VPN really comes into its own, because with this you can configure individual applications across all the different ecosystems to set up their own VPN tunnel. So you can control that access as well. And we have something called the Unified Access Gateway that will sit in your DMZ, and that's what will integrate with NSX, and that's what will integrate with per app VPN. So a user establishes, just launches the connection. They don't have to separately set up the VPN tunnel. They launch the application, and then transparently in the background, the application establishes a secure VPN tunnel to that backend application. It's the same with application 2, it's the same with application 3, and obviously we're not going to set up a VPN tunnel for malicious traffic, so that traffic is left with no connectivity into the data center. So that is one of the key unique selling points that we've got, because it keeps the application secure, it keeps the data center secure, and the end user doesn't even notice this is happening. And this is where we also integrate with NSX. Great, so we've got App One accessing the App One line of business application, and we can also have NSX in there to make sure that application tunnel can't hit any other service in the organization. So this is incredibly powerful, and a lot of customers really, really like the fact that we can do this. And it's quite a sort of a light bulb moment when customers understand exactly what we can do across this. So any questions? I don't think so. Okay. So moving on to the next section. So this is analytics. So analytics and our intelligence platform is probably one of the most important pieces of what we're doing. And this is because we can understand everything that's going on in the organization. If you think about, and I wrote a blog about this, if you think about where Workspace ONE sits across the end user computing estate, then we have visibility of all the devices out there, all the enrolled devices. We have visibility of all the applications that you're deploying. We have visibility of user access and what sort of authentication they're using, and device context and network context and the applications they're getting access to. we have lots and lots of information coming in from end users, and we can use Workspace ONE intelligence to really make the most of that from a security perspective. And again, if you go back to the traditional CM tools, to understand what's going on is very, very reactive. You have to almost know that something unusual has happened or that you've had a breach, and then go back and have a look to find out exactly what happened, dashboard, and make that information easily interpretable. I don't think that's an English word, but there you go. And then you have to take action. So this is the big problem. It's quite a clunky way of doing things. It's built for the old world. The new way of doing things is really around this user and entity behavior analytics. And again, I've called this out multiple times because it's so important, but it's about understanding the unusual activities in an organization and then taking action. So potentially you could have a user who's done something unusual and that will be flagged up straight away. So Workspace ONE gives us that capability, and it gives us that capability because we're drawing in information from multiple different sources, because we're automatically analyzing that information as it comes in. And because the automation platform that we've got, and I showed you some of this in the user experience session on Monday, we can automatically take actions based on the different security problems that we're seeing. So a good example of this of why UEBA is so important and behavioral analytics. In the UK, there's a large retailer called Morrison's, and all this is publicly available information. Back in 2014, they had a senior IT auditor in the organization. Now, as part of their job, this auditor had access to all the different systems. I mean, that was possibly quite a bad idea. But he had access to all the different systems, payroll, HR, finance, everything else to carry out his auditing tasks and duties. Now, he had a bit of a grudge against Morrison's. He got a telling off for something or other. And because he had this grudge, he decided to download all the payroll information for 100,000 current and previous employees of the retailer. So he downloaded it all, and then he uploaded it to news organizations and Pastebin. And then he tried to frame one of his colleagues. Now, he got found out, and in the end, he got sent to prison for 8 years. But the most surprising thing about all of this is that he was accessing these systems and downloading information over a period of about 4 months. So he wasn't caught. The only time that he got found out was when he actually uploaded all this information, and then news organizations got in touch with Morrison's. So with the old tools, if you don't know that something's going on, it's very difficult to find out that something's going on. But potentially, if a user and entity behavior analytics platform had been in place, then this unusual activity, maybe he was downloading gigs of information from systems, whereas previously he had been downloading a few megabytes worth, then this could have stopped him in his tracks within hours or minutes rather than 4 months or so. So I want to show you a quick video of what this actually looks like in practice. And we're going to talk about device risks, user risks, and then the automation platform that we've got to make this really easy. So let's say we've got a user in the organization called Peter. That's just his name in the demo. I'm not picking on anyone called Peter. So we've got a user, and he's got an iPhone, and he's got a Dell laptop. So what he's going to do, first of all, he's going to go into his iPhone. He doesn't want to be tracked, so he's going to turn off Find My iPhone. And straight away, that's going to flag something up to the organization that says, well, hold on, that's a risky behavior. Why would a user disable Find My iPhone? So straight away, the platform is going to do something. It's going to elevate the risk score of the device. And from now on, it's going to ask Peter to use VMware Verify to get access to any of the applications in the Intelligent Hub. Previously, you could just get straight access. Now it's going to ask him to authenticate using Verify. Great, fantastic. So that device is now on a medium risk score. But as I said, he's also got a Dell XPS laptop running Windows 10. So he goes onto the device and he loves downloading applications. So he's got another spam email that's come through that says, hey, come and download some applications. So of course he's going to click on that and he's going to download lots of different applications. Now what's going to happen is he's going to get a notification through the Intelligent Hub. And the notification is going to say a couple of things to him. It's going to say, let me just pause this. First of all, it's going to say OS upgrade, 5th notice. So Peter has been told 5 times that you need to update your version of Windows that you've got on your device. We've asked you to do this 5 times and you haven't, and we're going to make this easy for you. You can just click on that button, upgrade now, and we will push out the latest updates to your Windows 10 build. And then it's also got another notification on there that says device risk score elevated. So you can actually click on check it out to see which activities have caused that device risk score to be elevated. So as well as sending notifications out to Peter so that he can see this, as well as prompting up on his iPhone that he has to use Verify, it's also going to send notifications across to IT. So IT can actually go into intelligence, have a look at the dashboard, and then see exactly what's going on across multiple different users. But if we just focus on Peter and Peter's devices, so if we scroll down on the intelligence dashboard, then you can see here Peter's iPhone has got a medium risk score, and it's got, because of risky device settings, but his laptop has got a high risk score, and there's 3 behaviors that have flagged that up. So if we expand on the Dell XPS laptop behaviors, we should be able to see exactly what's going on. And we've got some very interesting terminology here. So first of all, and this sounds like really old English, we've got laggard update. So device is running Windows 10 1607. Enterprise Common Version is 1803. So it's not saying, look, you're running an old version. What it's saying is you're running a version which is behind most other versions in the organization. That's unusual. It's not a static threshold, it's a dynamic threshold. Then the next piece is compulsive app download. So the user of this device has exhibited compulsive app download behavior. 35 applications have been downloaded in the last 7 days, which is more than 99% of other users in the organization. Again, this isn't a static threshold. This is saying, look, what you've done is unusual compared to everyone else in the organization. Again, this is another tick for making this a risky device. And then the third behavior here is carbon black. Carbon black has detected 2 unusual processes. Now, all of these are probably related. So there's probably unusual processes because Peter has downloaded lots of applications. And also because the device hasn't been updated with the latest security updates, then these applications and these malicious processes are able to further disrupt and compromise that endpoint device. Now, because of this, because it's now got a risky device score, what Workspace ONE is going to do is to potentially block access to different applications. So that automatically, without IT having to do anything, they could just say, well, okay, if the user, so here we go, if the user's got a high risk score, we're going to block access to different components, different applications. So what's happened is automatically Workspace ONE has created a ticket in ServiceNow for the service desk. That's how they've seen that something's gone on. They sent a notification out to the intelligent hub for the end user saying your device score has been elevated. And now Workspace ONE has blocked access to various applications and anything sensitive until the user has been spoken to or those particular issues have been remediated on the endpoint device. So again, this is all automated capability. These are all automated technologies. So in the other capability we've got, I'm going to show you this very, very briefly, is the ability to take a feed from the critical vulnerability database, the CVE database. And what we can do is we can take this feed, so we understand in real time all of the different vulnerabilities that are out there. And because Workspace ONE is grabbing information from multiple devices all the time, we can tell which devices which have been deployed in the organization are vulnerable to these vulnerabilities. And then through the automation process that we've got, we can actually patch these devices until they're no longer vulnerable to those vulnerabilities. So that's what I'm going to show you now. So let me just stop share. While I'm doing that, does anyone have any questions? Any questions come up?
No, not yet. But now is your time. So if you have any, then ask them.
Right. Okay. Can you see my dashboard?
Yeah.
Fantastic. So what I'm going to show you now is intelligence, show you what it looks like in practice. So if I click on monitor, click on intelligence, click on launch, then what this is going to do is launch intelligence. So I'll just launch into intelligence, and in here I have access to all those dashboards that you saw earlier on. So I can go into the dashboards, I can click on security risk. Then in here you can see a subset of some of the dashboards we saw in that video. So we can see compromised devices, we can see different types of threats that have been that are detected in the network: anomalies, malware, network threats, credentials, policy. We can have a look at policy risks as well. So we can see devices with no passcode, unencrypted devices. But what I want to showcase here is that piece that we went through last, which is vulnerability. So this is where we're taking that CVSS feed for critical vulnerabilities. And you can see there's quite a lot out there. And we can also see how these map on. So let me just click on this one. That's a 9.3 critical. We can also see which devices we've got deployed are vulnerable this vulnerability. As you can see here, let's have a look. So this is CVE 2020-0922. It's a 9.3, which is very high on the vulnerability scale. We want to patch that. If we scroll down, we can see, so it's Windows 10. It's a Windows 10 update that fixes the problem. So this looks like a core Windows 10 vulnerability. And we can see down here, all of the devices that are still vulnerable to this vulnerability, to this exploit. And you can see they're vulnerable because the patch hasn't deployed. It's failed, or it's pending installation, or it's available and hasn't been downloaded. So this is where the automation system will push down that patch to these devices. If it's failed for whatever reason, it will push it down again. It will run a compliance policy to make sure the device is compliant. And you can, based on your particular security posture in the organization or an organization security posture, you can actually automate pushing out these patches. So you could say, well, if it's 9 or above, or if it's 7 and above, we're going to push out patches to these devices to make sure they are not vulnerable, and that we don't have a vulnerability going on for too long. So that sort of brings me to the end of the intrinsic security session. So if there are any questions, feel free to ask. And part of what we do today on this 4th session is to run through a lot of the technology we've been through earlier in the week. So hopefully that served as a bit of a refresher, and also to draw attention to the security proposition we've got in the platform. So if you've got any comments or feedback or questions, go ahead.
Exactly. Or if you don't have them now, you just reach out to your Arrow team, and we'll help you with getting those answers. But any questions at all? Comments? Feedback? You're more than happy to receive them. Yeah. Well, I thought it was pretty interesting, especially the workflow, and automation part of that, because that will, typically we see that the companies can't allocate enough resources to actually make that a priority. So exactly. In order to make the system do that, that's actually excellent.
Well, yeah, and a lot of customers have been asking, how do we secure our devices now they're not in the office? And that is a very, very hot topic across pretty much every customer. Exactly. A lot of organizations feel that they've lost control of their endpoints because they're out in the field and not in the office. So this is a way that we can retain control and security of those devices wherever they are.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and now a priority more than ever, I guess.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. All right. Doesn't seem that we have that many questions. Again, like the previous recordings, day 1, 2, 3, we will publish those as soon as possible. Next week, you should receive a link also with the presentations in PDF format. And with that, again, if you have any questions, call your local Arrow team. And other than that, have a great rest of your day. And also, thank you again for the presentation.
Not a problem. Take care, everyone.
All right. Bye-bye.